podcaster Joe Rogan announced that he was going to make exclusively available his podcast, which is listened by from all, I believe it was up to 200 million people actually downloaded each week.
Do they really? I've got to ask that question. When I hear numbers like 200 million, do they really? 6 billion Facebook users, really? But anyway.
But just remember, the MP3 gets downloaded even if only the first 2 minutes gets listened to. So, but so he's making a show exclusive to Spotify. All of the channels on YouTube are going to disappear. Probably availability of RSS feeds and other apps will disappear, and you have to essentially get a Spotify account to listen to it going forward. It's an interesting sort of I won't call it precedent just yet because we don't know exactly what it'll lead to, but the reason why it's worth talking about is that podcasts have not really inhabited this realm before, because the whole idea from the beginning was, like how we're doing, you just get together, get some microphones. If you need video, that's fine. If not, you can just record the audio, upload it for free, or you don't even upload it. You just provide an RSS link and through like a medium like Apple Podcasts or like iTunes or whatever, or Google or whatever, and then it's freely available for whoever wants to listen to it. And it's almost the ultimate sort of democratized content in a way. And historically, probably the more successful podcasters are the ones that have been able to generate revenue through advertising and that sort of thing so they effectively read out ads on the show and that sort of thing, which is what Joe Rogan does as well. The first 6 or 7 minutes is just him reading an ad script, but it sounds as if there was there's no numbers for it, but I saw in that article that they were suggesting $50 million worth of ad revenue for him. That's just before he did the Spotify thing. Yeah. So it can be quite good, but what I guess is what it will lead to effectively is this: is there a danger of the corporation, coming in and starting to own these things, or like they could come in and maybe set up their own, pay someone to set up their own and market it that way, which is entirely possible. And whether or not that would actually lead to, like almost like a tiered class system in podcasts where the people who still do it the old-fashioned way are at a certain level, but the exclusive content, the one that is marketed through the big platforms, are the ones that sort of grab everyone's ears, I guess, and what that might lead to. Yeah, well, you're right. Firstly, Joe is one hell of a businessman, no question about that. He's doing this deal is clever, but the timing I think is critical, and I think there's a couple of factors playing into this. I think Spotify, in a lot of ways, has destroyed the profitability of the music industry. And in doing that too, it's probably fair to say that they've reduced what potentially their profitability could have been through the way their platform distributes. New content and podcasting is just as listened to as music, but it's more self-contained. So you can't advertise in a song, but you can advertise in a podcast. And this is where the power of podcasting is. He's got enormous reach. He's a very interesting character. I mean, he does so many different things. And I think off the back of Corona and the fact that content has changed after this coronavirus sort of episode, I think there's no question about it. And podcasting is something new. As you say, time will tell whether or not this is a successful deal. Well, it's successful for Joe, we know that. Whether it's successful for Spotify or not is another matter. But it's intriguing to see, and it's really, I think this spells a whole new model for online content that is quite revolutionary, because it actually means that podcasts are more lucrative than content such as music, potentially anyway, and potentially more lucrative even perhaps than, I guess,
film and TV.
The interesting thing, though, is that they may potentially make a killing out of it, because if you think about the technology with dynamic ad placement, so no matter how many times say an episode gets replayed or played by someone, they can dynamically insert ads within the actual podcast itself. So instead of, Joe at the front actually just reading out of a script, they can, sporadically, place ads all the way through if they want, and they can change them and charge differently each time too.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because I think we've seen the platforms like Spotify come in with a whole new business model, and it's around a subscription and low cost but long term, and no ownership, of course. You sign up, you're only subscribing to Spotify. So what I find really interesting about this is that there's been a trend towards these new automated sort of platforms, whether they're Spotify or whether there's some sort of technology, sensing technology, where you pay subscription fees. And really the only way to make the big bucks is because it's finite. You've only got a market of your 200 million or whatever, and what then? And so on top of that, the best way to bring them together, listening to a single thing roughly at the same time as a podcast. And as you say, if you can insert advertising in it, or if you can get to know those listeners, then suddenly your business model becomes a lot more lucrative than just purely a music platform will ever be.
One thing I wanted to touch on too was I listened to his most recent episode with where he had Bill Burr on, who's always hilarious when those two start going at it, being two comedians. But they did touch on the whole Spotify deal and spent a little bit of their time talking about that. And Bill Burr kept coming up with this idea that he kept basically telling Joe, you've got to tell people, don't give your ownership away, don't give your don't sign up any like sort of dodgy deals where they can screw you over and pay you the pittance like they do in the music industry.
That's right.
And Joe made the point that this particular deal he only agreed to it because it was just a license. It wasn't ownership. And he actually said that he'd been approached several times in the past where they said, oh yeah, we'll expand your reach, but we're gonna need to own 50% of the show. And it's that sort of stuff that really is kind of, I think going forward, as long as everyone adheres to that and doesn't agree to sort of give that stuff up, then they're probably better off. But then there's also the opposite thing the other sort of side of the coin, where a company like Spotify could groom somebody to do a podcast that they can market, but then they pay the pittance to, which is effectively like what the musicians have to suffer through.
Well, that's right, because they split their rights under their original recording deal between artist and publisher. But I just think, and we were talking about this before, I mean, what a great deal for himself. That's one hell of a businessman right there. But, geez, do you reckon the fact that he's into MMA, has anything to do with it? I don't know. I don't think I could have negotiated a deal like that for myself. And I reckon I'm a fairly greedy person when it comes to that. So, he's done well. I think he should be congratulated. And like you say, I think it's trailblazing, and it's nice to see that he maintains ownership. But it's also very interesting to see that if Spotify are willing to spend that amount of money on him, on just a license, then they must be making a multiple, or have calculated that they're going to make a multiple of that sum back. So I guess I don't know how long it will take to find out whether it's a pass or fail, but I suspect it's probably a pass.
It boggles the mind, really, particularly with the fact that it sounds like as a user, we actually don't have to subscribe to get access to his show. So they've still paid for it to that nth degree. They're not going to get necessarily money from us users subscribing, like with a paid subscription. So they must have worked out that they could get that much ad revenue out of the show, which is really quite incredible. And I guess, from an entrepreneurial perspective on their part, it's tapping another market to make money, I guess.
That's right. And, at the moment, tech stocks are going up, so they've got the cash probably to burn. So it's probably, an easy choice for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I actually, just on a personal note, I very rarely sit through an entire 3-hour episode of his on the podcast unless he's got someone exceptional on there. It was handy to be able to, watch the YouTube clips where he's chopped up, 5-10 minute bursts of whoever he's talking to. But the fact that that's
much better.
Yeah, but the fact is that that's all going away now with his move to Spotify. So it'll be interesting to see whether Spotify also provide that as an option, and whether or not if they don't, whether or not there might be a bit of a backlash from the the audience that that follows him. There'll be the diehards that'll follow him over, of course, but whether or not he might even experience a drop-off because of the exclusive licensing thing. Why do I have to sign up for Spotify for this? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It raises a really interesting question. And another one that I'm interested in is what's Google doing? Like, YouTube has got a business model. Not that anyone I know subscribes to it, but if they're going to start to lose content like that from YouTube, this is the first time that I think we've really seen a significant shift of content away from YouTube. I can't think of anything this big where the content's sort of like suddenly, like by license or through a deal, like excluded YouTube. So they're going to have to come back with something, surely.
Well, not necessarily, if they're not onto it, unless, if they're playing catch up or whatever, or they might have just decided that, we're just the premier destination for people uploading content and it doesn't matter.
Of cats and people getting concussions.
And that's where they may stay.